Good afternoon and welcome to the Fire Engineering and Firefighter Nation Humpday Hangout. Today we are going to be joined by the brothers from the Tailboard Consulting. Myself and Bill Carey are going to be hosting it. I'm Mike Dugan, and we thank you all for joining us today. And we are going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the fire service world with these folks. And we are going to talk a little bit about what they are specialists in, which is highly reliable organizations. And we're going to ask them first to give us a definition of what a highly reliable organization is. So, Dane, do you want to start us off?
Sure, Mike. Thanks for having us today. It's a really long word, and it turns a lot of people off when they start hearing it, but a lot of it's what we do in the fire service already about training and constant training and constant seeking out improvement. The highly reliable organization, or HRO, just has key identifiers, key principles, and key behaviors that make it repeatable. And so there's two different ways to look at it. One group looks at it from 5 principles to guide a fire department, and one group looks at it as 8 behaviors to guide firefighters. And those 8 behaviors and those 5 principles just help us be safer at what we do and more effective at providing services to the community.
And
does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, it does. It does. And it sounds semi-technical, but I think what we are looking at is ways that the organization, as my dad used to say, fires on all 8 cylinders all the time, so that the organization is functioning highly at all times, especially in times of need and times of crisis, when things are going on and when the brothers and sisters are in harm's way. Does that make sense, Jeff?
Yep, absolutely makes sense, because we don't seem to have issues with the day-to-day operations, but things change when we get out on the fire ground, and as the stress level increases, as the amount of emergency activity increases, we find that our attention span, our ability to be able to focus on activities, shoots way down, kind of like tunnel vision. And so we really need to take some appropriate steps to be able to recognize that and to be able to deal with that.
Okay. And Bill, what do you think about this, and what are your questions for these guys, Bill?
I like what they got going. It's really, really interesting because it encompasses both the individual education component and the collective or the company education component, and it makes, especially areas of like lessons learned, more widens the impact area. But what I'd like to get from our guest is what started them looking at the subject of high reliability organizations and adjusting it in the fire service, and then also what I like the part about the 7 people that you hate to work with, or the highly toxic people, such like that. I'm going back in mind through an old article of theirs that I read. But just what got each of you started in focusing on that, and then writing on that in engineering, and then how did you get together to turn this into your consulting?
I'll go ahead and start with that, I guess. But I know Craig has some piece to add, and Jeff does too. When I was going back to school, I was studying leadership, public safety leadership, and that led me into organizational behavior and understanding why people make the decisions they do and what drives them to excel in their professions. And I stumbled onto HRO stuff and started studying it and realized that the HRO, the behaviors that an HRO seeks out really fit well with the fire service and really fit well with encouraging good decision making and hopefully helping us do our jobs better. And I actually wrote a paper on it, and it just kind of sat aside for a while. And then I worked with Craig and Craig and I were teaching, and Craig has a different background from the airline, and I'll let Craig take over here in a second, but it's on crew resource management, and crew resource management uses a lot of those same ideas, and so Craig and I got together, and for example, the 7 hazardous attitudes that you talked about come specifically from Craig and from crew resource management. Those things, the HRO and the CRM fit well together, so we started writing together. So Craig, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, good. I got logged on a little bit late there. Apologize for that. Thank you guys for having us on. I think a simple way to look at a lot of the stuff that we're writing about is just that we're looking at it from a human point of view. In the fire service, in the airline industry, in many other industries, we as humans have tendencies and behaviors, and there are a lot of commonalities, especially when you narrow it down to one profession. So as much as we like to think of ourselves as individuals, as firefighters, we begin training on day one, and that starts to funnel us into a tunnel where we begin to build a lot of the same behaviors and the same habits. And what the crew resource management does, and a lot of what the HRO does, is look at what are the weaknesses in that and what are the tendencies, and then come up with solutions and systems to help prevent us from having accidents, incidents in the future. The crew resource management, that started, for those that aren't familiar with it, years ago in the airlines. The airline industry found that airplanes weren't crashing because an engine died or a wing fell off or any of those types of incidents. Airplanes were crashing because people in the cockpit were having issues with each other, and it was distracting them from their real job. And there are a lot of similarities when we look at that between what the airlines do and what the fire service does. It may not seem like it at first, but we both respond in emergency situations. We work in a hierarchical structure, and those types of similarities lend crew resource management and the HRO topic well to the fire service, we believe.
And Jeff, what's your take on this?
Well, when we go through our shows, I tend to defer a lot to Dane and Craig. I'd have to say they got me involved to begin with, a lot on the technical end of producing the podcast. But I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with both the comments that they've said and the material they've been putting forth in the article, the magazine articles, as well as the book that they've been working on.
Okay. So now we have a highly reliable organization. We have an organization that is working very, very well. How does that translate, and what is the flow from the organizational to the operational, and how does that work?
I'll take that, Mike. The gist of it is to try to engage everybody, and that's why I say the fire service already does a lot of this, is we're problem solvers, and we're pretty good at talking to each other. The one thing that the HROs try to overcome is that we work in a hierarchical structure like Craig referred to, and sometimes because of the way people are and because of the way they react to a hierarchical structure, they might be hesitant to bring something forward. So let's say you got a 6-month firefighter, and the captain gives an order to go in through the front door. The 6-month firefighter notices that the roof might be sagging over the front door. It's a pretty simple example, but that 6-month firefighter in our hierarchical structure might be hesitant to say, hey, Captain, did you notice that roof sagging? And it's not about taking away from the authority or the leadership of the company officer. It's just about working together, like you said earlier, Mike, firing all 8 cylinders, so that we build an environment, we build a group environment where people are encouraged, actually expected to speak up when they see something, rather than, kind of that old saying, I understand the sentiment behind it, but sometimes it might get taken too far, where we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So that means keep your ears open and your mouth shut. That kind of, I understand what, it's about learning, it's about having a new firefighter learn, but it kind of encourages the behaviors where the younger firefighters might be afraid to speak up, or a captain might be afraid to speak up to a battalion chief, so on and so forth. And so the HRO idea tries to engage everybody and make everybody, for lack of a better word, equally responsible for making sure that the solution we have to our problem is the most effective one.
Okay. And
Craig, would you say that hits it pretty well?
I think so. I think another angle that might help describe it too is it looks a lot at past incidents. So it looks a lot at events that have happened in the past and tries to learn from those. And we've got our Firefighter National Near Miss Reporting System that came and was built off of the airline system. It's very similar. But what it does is it takes a look at what are the mistakes that people have made in the past, and let's learn from those so that we don't make the same mistakes. And that's a big piece of it.
well, go ahead. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, and something else to keep in mind too is if we're trying to take it to an operational realm, it's something that has to be talked about in the fire hall and throughout the department. And I think honestly it has to be practiced as well too. It's like any other skill where if we've got a whole culture that's built around that hierarchical structure on the emergency scene, we have to actively work to try to change some of these behaviors to make it allowable to interject if you see something that's wrong. So, you know, having a few company officers realizing that doesn't translate down to the troops, and talking around the coffee table is a good place to start, but I think in the training realm you have to employ that as well too, so it starts to become acceptable and starts to become part of our culture.
I think that's very, very important. I have a good friend who tells a story about something very similar to that, about a fire out in Seattle and the Mary Pang fire. And the officer was a cigar-chewing old-timer, and as they're going in, the probie sees smoke coming through cracks in the sidewalk. And because he's so scared of this officer who is so gruff and everything, he doesn't say a word. They go in, and nobody knew there was a basement in the building, and the basement collapsed, and Seattle lost 6 firefighters, and that officer happened to be one of them. And this probie survived until the day he dies. He's going to say, why didn't I say anything? And I think that's, in the New York City Fire Department, we have the terminology that they use for terrorism. If you see something, say something. And we preach that to everyone. You can say it, and the officer listens, hears it. Whether he acts on it or not, whether he already knows it, that's up to him. But then afterwards, you go back and you sit down with that young firefighter or whoever else it is on your crew, and you say that was a good catch, or, you know, I already knew that, but that was good that you brought that to my attention. And you make it part of the company because you're improving the safety of everybody by working together towards that common goal.
Absolutely, that's a great example, Mike, and that's a great way to take it. And the example you gave, and then the way you took it to the crew level, is a perfect way of looking at it, because the captain may have seen it, and it might help to encourage that behavior in the future. It will help to sit down afterwards and say, yeah, I saw what you were talking about, and this is why I did what I did, or thank you for saying that because I didn't see that. And I'm really glad that you brought it up. Depending on, you know, it doesn't matter which way it goes, but encouraging that behavior is a big part of it. And that's what a lot about the HRO and crew resource management, because they fit so well together, they kind of get blurred. But that's a lot of what that's about, is encouraging those behaviors in the firefighters and in the captains, and making sure that everybody is feeding in the information. And it helps improve situational awareness by doing that, so that you take that example in Seattle. There was unfortunately a lesson in situational awareness, and it's unfortunate that, but that's the environment we work in. I actually did a study, or I had to do some research for the NFA on our fire department, and we see it in our department. We see it everywhere. It's a fire service cultural thing that we have, where we respect the authority of the rank, and we respect the experience of seniority. And sometimes it makes it harder for those younger firefighters to speak up. And so I really appreciate, Mike, what you had to say, because bringing it back to the station and doing what you explained really does encourage those positive behaviors.
Let me ask one point here. Before you get into the implementation of the CRM and HRO. I'll be a bit of a devil's advocate. And again, it's not a slight toward your work. I love what you've got written, and you guys are actually due probably for another post on engineering. And for those of you watching, if you go to engineering and just type in the search area more Tailboard talk, you'll find their articles in there. I highly encourage you to read them and read them more than once, print them out, and share them around with the guys at the station. But let's say, okay, crew resource management and highly reliable organization. I think that, with the exception of people who are reading your work, following your work, and probably watching today as preacher to the choir, when people hear those terms in the fire service, there's probably a good percentage that just gloss over it because, one, it's not attractive. It sounds like technical, business, guy in a suit talk, or it sounds like chief officer management material. How do you take how do you take like the meat and potatoes of what you guys write about and teach about, and make an impact into the company officer, the firefighters on this shift, where they can take it back to their peers and say, no, your misinterpretations and your biases about this are wrong. Here's what this is really about. How do you guys deliver that message over those stereotypes?
I guess if you find the answer to that, we'd like to know. We fight with that a little bit ourselves. In fact, I was just writing an article. I just sent it yesterday, and I had somebody proofreading it, and they said, well, you didn't even mention high reliability organization to the last paragraph. And I said, well, I did that on purpose because, like you said, Bill, people tend to gloss over it because it doesn't sound like something we can use every day. And that's something that we fight with all the time. I guess I don't really have a good answer for you, Bill, because what we are talking about is stuff that applies every day, firefighter level, captain's level, chief's level. Everybody has to be on board. And there are departments that have put it in practice, and they've been successful at doing it, but it takes buy-in from the whole department. Having said that, I do think you can do it at a crew level to some extent, because I like to think that I practice what I preach, and as a captain, I like to think that I brought it to my company level, and then hopefully it can spread out from kind of grassroots effort also. And I know that doesn't answer your question directly, but maybe Craig can feed a little more into that. But that's kind of what I think off the top of my head to answer your question.
Thanks.
Craig?
I think, Bill, this is something that we've wrestled with because a lot of the terminology is very complex and it's confusing. It's something I wrestle with. But if we can get that message out to everybody, it is very applicable on a daily basis. A couple of the examples I was thinking of are, we kind of went earlier in the conversation one direction, but another direction we take this when beyond the getting a junior person to speak up is the identifying the crew member with the skills and the abilities that best fit a situation. If you have a person on your crew that's got experience in their past as an electrician, and you're dealing with an electrical type emergency, regardless of their rank or seniority, you need to use them as your resource. And so it's a lot of what we're looking at is identifying the human resources that best fit the situation, but also looking at what are our tendencies as humans. It's understanding that a veteran firefighter sees a different picture than a novice or a new firefighter. And you can break it down to where every person that shows up on a fire sees a different picture. Even though it's the same fire, the same scene, we all pick out different pieces of it. And the novice and the newer firefighters are going to tend to pick out the details because their frame of reference comes from their textbooks, their SOGs, their past training. The veterans are going to be able to see a broader picture. They make decisions faster because they have more experience. They're going to refer to the term RPD, recognition prime decision making, is what they're going to rely on to make those decisions because they have experiences built up over time. So they go through a slideshow in their mind and pick out the one that fits closest to that situation, and they can make decisions and do things. They can act a lot quicker. But if we don't understand how we make decisions in the different pictures that people see at scenes, then we're missing some of the communications that need to take place, especially when things can go wrong on a scene.
I find that very interesting, and I think it really is the biggest problem I know from teaching at the FDNY and teaching firefighters and everything else is one of the issues we have is firefighters don't want to be told they can get better or they need help. When we taught at the FDNY, we used to use Dr. Covey's circle of influence, circle of concern. And all of the critiques came back, too much of that Dr. Covey self-help crap. We don't need that. We took Dr. Covey's name out of it, and the guy said, I don't know where you guys came up with that donut scheme of circle of concern and influence, but that's brilliant. Okay? They don't want to be told that they need help. And that's the thing that I think is part of this, you know, when you talk about you know, the high reliable organizations and prime decision making and all those other things, if you can bring it down to the firefighter level, I think that is one of the biggest things to get the buy-in from across the board.
I agree, Mike, and I think we probably started out covering it from an angle that was not as effective. And I think trying to take it down to the firefighter level, and it's not so much now. I guess the way we look at it, it's not so much about helping the firefighters be better, because firefighters come to work expecting to do a perfectly good job. They come to work to be good at what they do. They are good at what they do, and I totally understand, because I don't like being told that I'm not doing a good job either. And so one way that I do think is important to consider is that the HRO and the CRM tries to make everybody, it tries to build a group, it tries to build a team, it tries to engage everybody, and especially with our younger generations coming into the fire service, those younger generations enjoy being a part of the decision making at some level. Obviously they're not going to be deciding where $1 million are going to be spent tomorrow, but they like being a part of the decision making at their level. And the HRO and the CRM both engage employees, which means, you know, by extension, that they are part of that decision-making process, and that's the way I think that we try to look at it from here on out. You know, that we've done recently. I don't know exactly when the breakover date was. There wasn't like all of a sudden we decided, hey, well, let's do it this way. But we've gone that direction, and I think you're right, Mike and Bill. Both you hit the nail on the head. It is tough, but I do think. If we look at it from the point of view of how can we engage our firefighters, how can we get people being more involved in the decision making, I do think that would help. It is my opinion. I guess, Jeff, do you agree with that? Do you think that that's been a more effective route to look at this?
I do. You know, recognition prime decision making is not something that just kind of rolls off the tongue, so to speak. And so, you know, when you can bring it down to firefighters' terms, how do you make decisions? You know, how do you make decisions in your personal life and with your family? You know, something breaks at home, how do you figure out how to fix it? If first thing you do is you go back to what's happened to you in the past, your past life experiences, to figure out, okay, I've seen this before. It's probably this, and if it's not this, it's maybe this or the other thing. And so I don't know how we come up with a new vernacular that's, you know, firefighter friendly or fire service friendly, that's uses simple language, but, you know, that's the basic concept behind recognition prime decision making, is basing our current decisions on past experiences and the outcomes, or at least that's one of the components of it. So yeah, I agree that the technical background of it, kind of like that Covey example, when you look at the technical part of it, people get kind of freaked out about it in the fire service, but if you can bring it down to real terms and take technical terms and you know, scientists and doctors out of it, it seems to be more relatable to the guy in the street.
I think an example of what we've done to try and do this is we've taken an incident command chart and we've put the HRO topic on that chart to kind of show where all the pieces fit, because there are a lot of pieces to it. And we break it down into a learning culture, the principles, the behaviors, and then some of the systems that you can use within an HRO. And in most of our later articles, we've included that, and it's even got color in it too. But it actually shows an HRO is its principles. So it's 5 principles that organizations that are highly reliable, these are the principles they follow. These are the things that those types of organizations do. And it can be a fire department, it can be a business, it can be an airline, it can be different types of industry. And then we list in another column the behaviors. There are 8 behaviors that have been identified that these types of businesses, these types of companies, they hire people that have these behaviors, and then they promote these behaviors within those people after they hire them too. So they take those abilities and make them stronger. And I think that's one of the strong areas the fire service has is we take people's ability, their work ethic, and we teach them so much more over their years with us because we put such a heavy emphasis on training.
Bill, you have anything on that?
Yeah, can you take us through how, let's say how you go about, if you've got a department or if you've got chief officers that want to bring you in to go over improving themselves, and so like half the battle's won already. How do you go about with your 8 areas? How do you go about addressing areas of that department? Are you spending time with them beforehand to understand how they operate, looking at their past operations? Are you 50-50 focused on the fireground operations and administration operations? Are you covering just a wide area? Are you just hitting the like, I don't know, maybe like their top 3 problem areas? Can you take us through how you would work with a department or work with chief officers and the training cadre to make improvements that they're asking for to help learn?
I guess we're one place to start out broad. It's important to start out broad and lay that foundation. And the HRO ideas can't exist without a learning culture, and a learning culture can't exist without strong leadership. And so the place to start for us is with the leadership and describing what is good leadership, I guess. And in most cases, and I know this sounds like we would come in and say, well, you're bad leaders. That's not the point, but we just reinforce those good behaviors that exist. Maybe point out some places where there's some room for improvement, but all in all, obviously we aren't going to come in and say, well, you suck at what you do, because that doesn't work. That's not productive. But leadership is the important piece, because we can't have a learning culture in a fire department unless there's good leadership from top to bottom, and that means being adaptable, being flexible, being open to new ideas, being approachable. Those have been identified around the world for decades as being qualities of good leaders, so reinforcing those ideas that it's important to be approachable and it's important to be adaptable to things as they come forward. From there, it's easier to build a learning culture, and the learning culture is simply asking the question why. It's actually, instead of allowing, I almost said it myself because I've been in the fire service 25 years. Instead of allowing people to say why, it's about expecting people to ask the question why. Why do we do it this way? Why don't we try it this way? And a lot of times someone may say, well, why don't we do it this way? And there might be a perfectly good answer for it, but if the answer that person's receiving, they say, why do we do it this way? And the answer is, well, because we've always done it that way. That's a signal that maybe it's time to evaluate. Maybe it's still the right way to do it, but it's a signal that we should be evaluating why we're doing it that way. So start with the leadership, try to develop the learning culture, and encourage people to ask why. And once we get past those hurdles, if those hurdles exist, and firefighters like to learn, so it's not like they're big hurdles, because firefighters enjoy learning. They enjoy going out and training. They enjoy learning about their profession. Then it's about reinforcing those 5 principles and those 8 behaviors, and really all they do is work within that learning culture. And I guess, Craig, do you think I tried to keep it short and simple, but did I cover what you would say we would answer Bill's question, Craig?
I think so. And in a lot of cases, just maybe to even clarify that a little further, it's going in and just introducing the material to start with, to begin to build that understanding of human behavior. Dane mentioned the leadership portion of it. We have to understand these parts of it. A lot of what I've seen in my experience in the fire service is we confuse leadership and management. We are some of the best managers I have ever seen in the world. I think any business would be lucky to hire a firefighter as a manager, because you give us a task and we will get it done. That's in our DNA from day one in the fire service, and we sometimes call that leadership. Well, a person leading a crew or an organization or a battalion has to have management and leadership skills, and so it's clarifying that leadership is about it's going outside the boundaries. It's bringing about change. It's motivating people to do work. It's motivating people to come along with those changes and to understand those topics that come with it, and then understand who they are as individuals. And once people understand what those concepts are, and then what our tendencies are, what the limits of our human behavior are, now we can get into the application phase of it, where we actually start addressing some of those issues on the fire ground. An example of that would be, we talked earlier about a new firefighter being hesitant to speak up. That's been found in many, many cases. That they found the same thing in the airlines. They had the same hierarchical structure. Well, we have to operate within a hierarchical structure. The way they've trained with that is they actually put pilots through that training in a flight simulator, and they put them in situations where now the new person has to speak up. Well, we can do the same thing on the fire ground. We can do a fire training evolution and then put that new person in a situation where we're forcing them to communicate on the radio or to speak up to their company officer, so we can train them to deal with those issues that lie within our human behavior.
I have a question, because I also doing my teaching and traveling around, I see a lot of firefighters and fire officers throughout the country, and one of my questions would be, you talk about a highly reliable organization, and unfortunately there are departments out there that are not highly reliable organizations, but there are officers and companies that want to be highly reliable companies and start that teamwork. And I know Dane said it earlier that he hopes he's practicing what he preaches as a captain in his fire department and with his company. Can someone who is looking at your material, can you do this on a smaller scale, almost in like an absence of leadership, to protect your people? Is that something that works and that you can do?
I believe so, Mike. I guess just to give a small example, I had a crew. We went to an apartment fire. It was started out as a room and contents in a bedroom on the top floor. Of course, it vented, went into the attic, because it seems like they're always on the top floor, into the attic. And we were fighting it in the attic, and I had been made division supervisor, and there was a few engines on the floor with me in a truck company working. And as I was supervising that floor, that division, there was some radio traffic from the truck company outside that was reporting that the roof was starting to sag. They had, I think there was 3 reports. I listened to the radio traffic afterwards. I think there was 3 reports of impending failure in the roof. And because I was busy doing other things, I missed that as the division supervisor. And I had one of my firefighters come up to me. The incident commander said, asked me if I was going to be able to make any headway on this fire. And I was going to answer, yes, I'm not ready to pull the crews out yet. And at that moment, I had a firefighter come up to me because he heard the radio traffic and said, hey, did you hear the reports from the truck company about the impending failure of the roof? And I said, absolutely not. I didn't hear. I said, there's been, a couple of reports of an impending failure. So that changed my decision on the spot, and I pulled the crews out of the division. And as I walked out the door of the building, there was a roof failure. And I think that's an example of, I hope, an example of where at a company level I've been able to encourage my firefighters to be free, to feel free to speak up, because he was a fairly young firefighter at the time. And so I do think it is very possible to do it at the company level. And I hope that by doing that, it can spread across the department, and because people begin to understand that it's not, in a lot of ways, I think it's a threat to, I think people feel like it's a threat to their authority, when in fact I think it makes them stronger officers. I hope it does. I mean, that's my opinion on it, is that it does. And so I hope that as people see that and see how it works, that it would encourage others to adopt the same practices. Craig, what's been your experience on that?
My experience has been similar. I was able to do it on a company level as a captain, because it comes down to the crew working together and understanding these concepts. You can do it on an individual level, but it only goes one way. So, for example, a firefighter that knows they need to speak up might speak up, but that doesn't mean anything's going to happen out of it. It actually might backfire. At a crew level, you can do it more functionally, because if the captain and the firefighters both know and understand the concepts of, okay, this firefighter's not questioning my authority, they're bringing up something they either don't understand or they think is pertinent to the situation. That it works on that level. Ideally, it works on a battalion, shift, department level the best. It has the largest amount of impact, but you can do it on a company level.
And I think by doing it on a company level, sometimes you can start a groundswell up, and other people see how well your company's performing, and hopefully they can buy into the concepts and the ideas. And I think that's part of it is, I mean, very honestly, sometimes you have to lead from the bottom up, unfortunately, and it could start in a firehouse company, even just a shift. But sometimes you have to, because unfortunately, in some places there are people who are there in positions of authority that are just there to collect a paycheck or stroke their own ego or position themselves for their next gig.
And sometimes it's simply a matter of the word that comes from the bottom is a little bit more believable and understandable than the word that comes down from top. So, you know, the chief can have a great idea, but it can be hard to be accepted by those below it. But if that idea funnels back down and starts to work its way back up again through the organization, there's a lot of buy-in. Okay, I see it working. This guy's having some success with it. There must be something to this thing. And sometimes a smart chief officer will even forego that top step and just plant those ideas amongst a few of the leaders in the department, let them grow there. It's not about who gets credit for the idea, but having it happen. So, yeah, I think the individual successes could lead to overall organizational success as well.
And I think that's also a characteristic of a great leader, that person does not care about who gets the credit for the success and does not care about whose idea it is and does not care. Whatever makes his department better, safer, and more efficient, they buy right into. And that, to me, is one of the keys and the hallmarks of a great leader.
I agree.
I agree, Mike, and what you were saying there just kind of reminded me of one of the principles is a preoccupation with failure. And for people that are getting into the HRO topic or just starting to understand it, what that means is your organization focuses on failure. And at first it really sounds kind of contradictory. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But what it's saying is they focus on and they look at and critique and review incidents, things that have gone wrong, not just within their own organization, but within other organizations like theirs, so that they can identify and prevent those things from happening again. And so that's what one of the principles of an HRO is a preoccupation with failure. So organizations that review incidents and learn from their incidents, they bring out the mistakes that were made and they discuss them so that somebody else doesn't make that same mistake. That's the preoccupation with failure, and that's one of the principles of an HRO.
And I think that's, I mean, from, you know, as a captain in New York City, we had a fire. We'd go back to the building that was on fire, and we'd go over that fire. We'd drill on that fire for days at a time. And what did you do? Why did you do it that way? What information did you have? It's not that somebody failed, somebody made a mistake or anything else. It's what can we learn from this? Was it the right move? Was it the wrong move? Did somebody do something? Would you have done something different? And seeing it in the light of day with no smoke, there's always ways you can improve, and that's how you get better, by going over what you've done and what can you do. Because if anybody who's gone to a fire who doesn't say they could do something better at every fire they go to is fooling themselves.
I think that's a good... Sorry, Greg, I talked over you.
No, I was just saying I totally agree with that. And fortunately, the last few years here, I've been working under leadership that they're not afraid to admit their mistakes either. They're the first ones, just like you're saying, Mike. We go back and we go over the fires, and they go, you know what? I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't do it this way again. I learned something from this, or I did this. You guys shouldn't do that next time. And that's just it's an ideal setting for everybody to learn from that. But I agree with you. I make mistakes at just about every incident. If you go back and you critique it and you learn from it, well, then you don't make those mistakes the next time.
And I think Craig and Mike, both you hit on a real key piece of this, is creating that learning environment that we've been talking about. Can start just, it doesn't have to be a formal class. You don't have to come in and have someone come in and say, well, this is how we're going to do it. It's behaviors. It goes back to organizational behaviors again. If the leader, whether it's a battalion chief or a captain or a senior firefighter, saying, hey, here's the mistake I made, it shows that those leaders are fallible as well as everybody else, but as long as we learn from them so we don't make the same mistake in the future, that's a key piece to it. And if that battalion chief or that captain is willing to say, hey, here's my mistake, I don't want you to make the same mistake in the future, so this is what I would have done differently, it shows, and it really, I think, strengthens that learning culture. And that's when it all comes back to that. It's all about leadership, and it's all about a learning culture. All the principles and all the behaviors really come back to that. And so as much as we talk about it, and as complex and complicated as it sounds, there's a lot of real simple things we can do every day to get this ball rolling and to really make it useful day to day, and help ourselves just be better at what we do, because we like what we do. Everybody loves being a firefighter. We like learning about it, and that's just one more way to do it, and it can start at the top. I guess that's just what I think about it.
Okay, and the next question I have is, Dane, you've talked about what we do day to day. What are some of the things you recommend people do day to day? And I don't know if you want to take this one, or Jeff, or Craig, but what do you recommend we practice? What makes us better at doing this and becoming part of this HRO?
Can I jump in just quick, Dane, and then I'll have you explain it?
Absolutely.
Okay. This kind of fits in with principle number 3. We talked about the 5 principles of an HRO. We just talked about one of those, and another one of the principles is a sensitivity to operations, which refers to the day-to-day operations and refers to those on the street know best what's going on the street. And so those that aren't on the street, in a lot of cases the leadership that are making those decisions, really need to refer to them and get information from them, because every promotion you get takes you farther and farther away from street operations, and you lose what's really going on at the time a little bit. You still have your experience, you still have a lot of knowledge, but the day-to-day operations you lose touch with. And that sensitivity to operations speaks to making sure you maintain that contact with those working on the streets, finding out if the equipment that you're purchasing is actually working for them, or if they need something different, would be an example.
Dane?
Yeah, I think that's one great example. It is about listening to the people who do the work every day. There's a lot of different ways. It comes down to discipline. In the fire service, very few people do something wrong on purpose. We don't go out and say, I'm going to screw this up and I'm going to do this wrong. Yet the fire service, very often, when someone makes a mistake, decides to use discipline as their way to teach somebody how to do their job better. And one way to apply this and to build this learning culture and to apply the HRO idea is to recognize that people make mistakes. And if someone makes a mistake, why did they make that mistake? A lot of times when someone makes a mistake, I look at myself. Well, I didn't provide them that training, or I haven't refreshed on that, or I didn't give them the guidance they needed, almost in a mentor type of role. And if they make a mistake and I teach them and I try to help them through that, and they make the same mistake again, well, okay, now maybe we need to look at something's not right, and maybe it will eventually evolve into discipline. I'm not saying that we don't have discipline in the fire service, but I do think we're very quick to discipline people. So I think one way to apply it day to day is to recognize that we're in a very complicated job, and people are going to make mistakes. And sometimes it's better to start addressing those mistakes from a teaching point of view than it is from a disciplinary point of view. I also think Craig when Craig was a captain, he was really good about doing what he called after-action reviews, just simply talking about calls. Every call we go to, even the simplest medical, there's something we can learn from. And so he might ask his crew, hey, what did you see that we could have done different? Or I made this mistake on this call, which we kind of already covered, but I mean, that's a day-to-day thing, is how could we have done this better? Or making sure that when you give an assignment, everybody understands what's going on around them. One of my pet peeves is that ICS has turned into something where we use it to fill in the boxes. ICS originally wasn't developed to fill in the boxes. ICS was about developing situational awareness with everybody operating on the fire ground and making sure we knew, A, what the objectives were, what we were trying to achieve, and B, what the other crews around us were doing, and that developed that situational awareness. And that's what the HRO piece is all about, is having those conversations. When you give an assignment, this is what we want to do, this is what we want you to achieve, and this is what the crews around you are doing, so that people can compensate without hurting each other. So those are just a few examples. I guess, Jeff, do you have any other ideas? Some quick ones off the top of my head, but Jeff, do you have any other ideas to add to that?
Yeah, no, the after-action reports is a good example, and where you've seen something that kind of went wrong out of the incident, talking about it, first of all, is a good first start. But whether you're using your own incidents, or if you're looking at NIOSH case reviews or YouTube videos that you find and you can discuss around the table as a crew, where you find some points in those videos that there's an unsafe situation developing or a warning sign of a potential problem, putting that out to the crew members and everybody discussing it, and having those folks, identify those things to you, but also to practice a little bit of what we're preaching there. Okay, you've identified a warning point, and here's what I would order next as the incident commander. Does anybody have a problem with that? Obviously ordering something that's not completely appropriate and giving the chance for the crew interjection around the table, so you can start having a little bit of practice at that, somebody speaking up if you see something, so that you can adjust what you're doing.
That sounds great, and I think this, the idea of the after-action report, the critiques, the going back and looking at the fires and learning. And I've gone to fires, and I'll never forget one of the fires I was at. One of the guys went up a fire escape to get into what he thought was the fire apartment. It was a totally different apartment, but the way the building was laid out, at the time, his best judgment was that was the fire apartment. So, looked at it, and going back and looking over it again, I said, you know what? I would have done the same exact thing if I had been a fireman at that fire. And as the officer, I said, okay, so what's the failure here? Well, the failure was ours as the officers, because we hadn't put critical information in the dispatch system about the way the apartments were laid out and which fire escapes served which apartments. And it was our job to correct that, and that's, again, it's a learning curve for everybody on this, that we found something that we could take. It wasn't really the firefighters' fault, it was our fault as the officers, because we hadn't done our job.
Yeah, that's a great example of how you get that learning culture going, and as a captain, I'm assuming it sounds like at this point you were a captain, and that shows a lot to your crew members, that you're willing to say, hey, this is a way we can improve this. This is maybe the mistake I made, or somebody didn't put this in there, and it encourages those firefighters to do the same in the future. And so that's it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. That goes back to that grassroots piece.
Yep.
Another thing it focuses on is the way we communicate, because it's often difficult to communicate in a polite or respectful manner. We get on a fire ground, things need to happen in a timely manner. Voices get raised because it's a loud environment, and so sometimes you get the people that, even if they know they need to speak up, they do it in a way that's either confrontational, or they do it in a manner that it takes 5 minutes for them to explain something that should hopefully only take a few seconds. And so it's part of this HRO and crew resource management human behavior piece, is people practicing and learning how to communicate concisely, accurately, and concisely.
And one of the things that I have spent a lot of my time on, I did a lot of teaching for the FDNY, and I worked part-time teaching out at other places, and one of the things that I ended up doing a lot is I studied Crucial Conversations, which I thought was a very, very interesting book, and one of the things I learned from that is communicating. And you got to be very careful, because on the fire ground you get emotional, and once you get emotional, you're not always thinking. So that balance that we have as leaders on the fire ground, in the firehouse, we have to be very, very careful about that and keeping those communications on a professional level, because it's sometimes not easy, as I say, to keep my Irish in. I get upset, and I want to, do what my father would have done, but I don't.
You hit on another thing there, Mike, when you were talking. I had to chuckle about the Irish thing. That's you do see tempers flare on the fire ground, but that's kind of a piece of the HRO idea, is understanding yourself, which goes back to the leadership again. It's understanding yourself and your behaviors and your speech patterns, and I'll use myself as an example. I might have been considered confrontational by some of the administration when I was a little bit younger, and so I gained a reputation. I was laughing at Jeff's reaction down in the corner, for those of you who can see that. I gained a reputation for that, and to this day that still follows me on occasion, because it's automatically assumed that that's the role that I'm filling. And so understanding that helps me approach what I need to say from a different angle when I see that happening. And so a lot of this, Mike, you're right, is understanding how you come across and how people see you when you're talking. And so it's important to not come down on, or it's important, I know this is getting touchy-feely, which kind of goes to an example Craig has from United, but you don't want to shut those people down for the wrong reasons. You don't want someone to come to you and I react the way I normally would, which I don't mean anything by it, but they perceive it as me being aggressive or me being non-appreciative, and so then they don't come forward again. And so it keeps going back to that leadership part, and that's why when Bill asked that question earlier, why that's kind of the foundation of this whole idea is to develop good leadership, or to strengthen those areas, because that's really where it all starts. And it does get into some of the touchy-feely kind of stuff. And I know United had a problem. United was the first one to adopt crew resource management. I'm going to actually let Craig explain this real quick, because it attaches to what I'm saying, but Craig knows the story a lot better. So Craig, you want to take that?
They were one of the first to adopt it, and they kind of became known as the touchy-feely airline in the industry, and people shied away from it. But they were also one of the first to address some of those interpersonal dynamics in the communication, which that's one of the things we bring up in just about every class we teach. Just out of curiosity, I ask, how many fires have you been to where communication was not an issue? And usually just about every class, it's everybody's consensus is communication's an issue at every fire. Yet how often do we truly train on communication? And I'm not talking the sender, the message, and the receiver type training. We understand that. I'm talking, how do you speak? What's your body language? How do you transmit a concise but accurate statement? How do you not offend people, just like Dane's been talking about? How are you perceived by others? How do you perceive others? We don't train on that communication side a whole lot, and that's what the crew resource management, the HRO, actually addresses those issues and provides specific training on communication. One of the examples that we use in the classes we teach is the PACE method of communication, where your communication and your volume level, the level of urgency increases depending on the amount of time you have. And so if you have time and it's not a life safety critical time decision right there or issue, you have time to what they call probe, and that's what you're doing is you're asking, you're kind of throwing out there that, hey, I see a concern, do you agree, is there something we can do about it, all the way up to what they call an emergency intervention, where you can do anything you need to stop that scene from hurting somebody. But they actually have their specific methods that we can teach to develop better communication skills.
I think that's amazing because I also know from being a fireman, one of my favorite stories is coming home one night after working 24 in the firehouse, and I walk in the door and I sit down to dinner with my wife and my kids, and my wife looks at me and says, "Honey, you're home. It's time to turn off the firehouse voice." And I was like, because my daughters thought I was yelling at them. My wife thought I was yelling at her. I was just louder and more in charge as the officer and everything else coming from 24 hours. Just like, turn off the firehouse voice, come back to the homeland. And I'm like, yes, dear, yes, dear. And you can see it. And it's part of the, you have to understand where you are, as you said, and what the urgency of your thing is. And here I'm sitting with, you know, 2 little kids, and I'm like, and my wife, God love her, brought me right back down to where I should be. And it works very, very well.
I've been told the same thing, Mike. I think it might be a fire service thing. My wife has said, you know, your kids are afraid of you sometimes, and it's because of that. You get that louder, your presence, you know, the voice a little louder, your presence is a little bigger, and in some ways that's kind of what we're talking about. Some of that is almost hurtful to the communication. Luckily, in the fire service, we kind of expect that, so it's not nearly as hurtful as it is when you come home. But I think that's a great example of how it's an exaggerated. I mean, the example is real, but it shows in an exaggerated way how our communication is in the fire service, because it shows just how overbearing we can be sometimes.
Yep.
And it creates a problem when emergency communications are necessary if we're always using our big boy voice and we've got a real situation that needs one now, but that's how we are talking on a regular basis out on the fire ground. So learning a few of those concepts, like addressing somebody by their first name instead of their rank or their title, or doing the exact opposite, bringing your voice back down. Steve, that roof is just about to go. You know, where you completely change the dynamic to be able to snap somebody out of that normal fire ground mode. And I think, Dane, you used that example in the past where you talked through the several steps of talking your way up if somebody's not listening when we're having that problem. But it really makes a lot of sense out on the fire ground.
Well, I think that's great, guys. Believe it or not, we're 3 minutes left into our hour, our Google, our Humpday Hangout. So I would like to start with you, Jeff. Closing thoughts on the way out and what you would like to tell us, please.
Well, what I'd like to say is don't discount HRO and the concepts here because of the terms or the how can it apply to you? How can you use that to build better success for your crew and for your department back home? Because a lot of this stuff, when you get past the terminology, just makes good sense.
Very good. Thank you. How about Dane, you?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I really appreciate having us on today, too. And I guess to sum it all up, I'd like to emphasize the fact that this whole idea really comes down to treating your people right and engaging everybody in your crew, and basic leadership ideas. And I think, like Jeff said, if we can get past some of the acronyms and some of the complex ideas, that's really what it all boils down to, is treating your people right. And I think that everybody can buy into that, because I think we all like to be treated well.
All right, I think so too. And Craig?
I'm not going to add a whole lot because I think Dane did a nice job of summing it up there. Just if people have questions, don't hesitate to contact us, call us, join our Tailboard Talk show on Friday, usually on Friday nights on Blog Talk Radio. Other than that, thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate being on. Had a lot of fun.
And I would like to thank all of you. Wish you all a Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. If you celebrate other holidays, whatever they are, I hope you have a great holiday season. To the people out there in the Hangout, I would like to also mention one quick thing. There is a scholarship available from FDIC and Honeywell this year. There are 25 scholarships available to FDIC this year, include airfare and hotels. If you're interested, you got to take a video of somebody you want to nominate and send it, and that would be a way to get them a full ride to FDIC. I can't think of anything better. You can learn about things like this and be at FDIC and meet people like this and just have a great, great time. I'd like to thank you guys all for being here with me, and I would like to say thank you for Fire Engineering and Firefighter Nation for allowing me this time to speak with these guys. Thank you all very much. Have a great day, and God bless.
Thank you.